Oh,
the
okay,
numbers.
there's all,
Yeah,
it's right there, okay.
except the top one,
Yeah. Do what?
with the shift
Yeah,
of
one.
one.
Give me just a minute.
Yeah, I would suggest that the first motion, Mr. Chairman, that you have in your hand right now be the first one that's read.
Yeah,
And then the next one is establishing the levy limit and excess capacity. And then the last motion that's read is setting the tax rate.
okay,
Okay, what's this one first, right?
yep.
Mr. Chairman, I move to establish a CIP ratio of 1.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
You voted aye, correct?
Yes, then that's 3 and 2 abstentions. Mr. Vino.
Yeah, which one's agree? 1 second, just right down the list, right?
No,
You want this one?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next,
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend the FY 2010 property tax levy at $33,731,195.25, which is a $22,904.75 less than the levy limit.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that's, again, 3 to 2. 3 with 2 abstentions. Mr. Vino.
Mr. Chairman, I move not to establish a residential tax exemption.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that's,
Abstain.
yeah,
Two.
it's a vote of 3 and 2 abstentions.
Okay.
It's not a
Mr.
majority.
Chairman, I move not to establish a commercial exemption.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 2 abstentions. 3-0-2.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Assessors that the FY 2010 tax rate be set at $13.47 per thousand evaluation.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 2 abstentions. Okay,
That's it.
that's it.
Even though we don't have any plans of that,
I would have to make up a motion. How should it be worded?
not to adopt an open space.
Okay.
Okay, you ready? I'm gonna let her just record.
Yeah. You all set? Mr. Vino.
Mr. Chairman, I move not to adopt an open space exemption,
Discount.
discount, I'm sorry.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Vino, seconded by Mr. Delaney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Again, 2 abstentions. Okay.
Chairman, I'd like to thank the Board of Assessors, not just for the presentation tonight, but for the work that they've been doing all year. Particularly Faith, she's done a terrific job.
I've said this several times in public, but I need to say it again, that the effort that the Board of Assessors has put in over the past 2 years has been substantial. We've actually improved our financial situation and closed the gap on tax delinquencies, which I guess we got to credit, to some credit to the collector. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that away. We're gonna go back to Town Administrator's report. I think we were on item 3.
We were.
4? 3. 3.
Number 3, I have determined that there is a level of interest from cellular vendors to put forth another request for proposals, seeking bids for a second cellular communications installation at the Swan Pond Water Tower. You'll recall that the board approved the lease about a year ago at this location. The lease was with T-Mobile for a 10-year term, and the value of that lease was just under $250,000. The proposal that I'm putting forward would be the same terms. It would be a 10-year lease. The antennae would need to be affixed to the exterior of the tank, so there'd be no visible cell tower. And as required by General Law, Chapter 30B, we are required to put it out to bid. As said, I've had contact with another vendor who's indicated an interest. Just to give you an idea of the number of locations and revenue that we receive for the entire community, we have a total of 4 locations where cell towers are approved and licensed by the Board of Selectmen. The total revenue stream is $155,000 a year. So it's not an insignificant amount of money, particularly when we're being asked to find new and creative ways of funding revenue. I did want to bring it to your attention because ultimately the signatory to the lease would be the Board of Selectmen, so it's my intent to put it out to bid, see what happens, and get back to you with a recommendation. Keep in mind that any lease that goes forward will not only need to be approved by the board, but there's a special permit needs to be granted through the Community Planning Commission. So the process would be special permit, and then also approval of the lease through the Board of Selectmen. The location has already been approved by town meeting as a location where the board can enter into a lease for cell tower communication. So, any questions on that?
Mr. O'Leary. Thank you, Sergeant.
Just when we, I guess my question was, on the lease agreement we entered into with T-Mobile,
Yes.
do they, maybe I'm misunderstanding, do they not have the option to bring on other carriers whereby we would get a piece of the action?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. And if that's the case, are we encroaching on their rights to that tower?
It's interesting. Of the 3 out of the 4 locations, we have an automatic provision that we own a piece of the action, and we don't need to put it out to bid. This one location had been put out to bid prior to myself coming on board, and that language was not included. So I went to council on it, and council ruled that we would have to go out for another procurement process rather than just adding it on because that language wasn't in the original bid documents.
Do we leave ourselves open to interpretation as far as what T-Mobile's rights are?
No, we've already, I've already spoken with T-Mobile, and they agreed that they don't have exclusive rights at that location.
Okay, that's great, okay, great.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Also, as the next item, you have received a document that's been signed by 39 residents protesting the placement of a cell tower antenna at the Tower Hill water tank, and I know that there's a history going back a number of years. Although I am sympathetic to the residents' cause, I do want to point out that the location was approved by vote of town meeting, which is required. The special permit has been granted by the Community Planning Commission back on November 3rd. And then finally, the lease was executed by the board. My recollection was back at the end of September. So please keep those things in mind when you do review the petition, is that we have a legally valid and binding 10-year lease with T-Mobile for that location. So it appears as though the residents' comments have come in a bit late in the public comment process.
As you recall, what went on at the Swan Pond Tower, it dragged on for a substantial period of time because of lawsuits that were eventually lost, but we could be in for more.
It's always that challenge.
Any other comments?
Nope.
Nope. Next.
Next, the board has received a notice that the Community Planning Commission has a vacancy. The vacancy will need to be filled until the next election, which is in May of 2010. So the board is aware that CPC has proceeded with posting the vacancy. Applicants will be submitting their letter of interest and resume. It requires a joint appointment of the Board of Selectmen and the CPC. So depending upon the number of applications that come in and the timing of your meetings and the CPC meetings, there will be an action that will be required. And I would ask that anyone that may be out there listening who's interested in serving on the CPC, this is your opportunity to serve your community.
Any calendar set on this yet?
No, we're kind of getting into for this board, we're getting into the busy time of year with the licensing process, which will be fairly extensive going forward, and also dealing with board and committee appointments, as you know. Those are the two main tasks that come up during the month of December. So it might be easier to coordinate calendars with CPC and someone they might be available.
Next.
Some good news, you may have read in the newspaper that the town received a $26,000 grant by the Mass DEP to study stormwater infiltration at Martin's Pond, and you have a copy of the letter that's been attached. Congratulations to the Department of Public Works and the Engineering Department for making it happen.
This is a grant not requiring matching funds, I take it?
No, not required whatsoever. And I'm presuming that under old and new business, the board will acknowledge the invitation on the turf field. Remain silent on that issue. Thank you.
Is that it?
That's it?
Well, we've got some time, so why don't we do old and new business? Mr.
Old
Delaney?
new business? Sure. Board members, 2 meetings ago, I advised the board that I did conduct a mediation session regarding the dog barking issue concerning Northridge and Spruce Road. And I suggested at that time that we should schedule a show cause hearing concerning this issue. Although I did recently receive communication from an attorney for one of the dog owners with a letter from a dog trainer, given the fact that I still receive complaints from a resident or residents of Northridge, probably more complaints I received than the animal control officer. The issue still continues, and I see no other way of bringing it to a head or a resolution without a show cause hearing, unfortunately. I rethought the suggestion by the chair the 2 meetings ago concerning whether or not we should have 1 or 2 separate hearings. And I do believe there should be 2 separate hearings for each particular dog owner. I think that would be the better course of action to take. So I would suggest, I hope the consensus would be to go forward with a show cause hearing, because I don't see this issue going away short of that.
Comments, anybody? Well, I would agree with you on 2 parts. One is that it has gone on for a long time, and I think we've given all parties an opportunity to try to resolve the problem. And 2 is I think it is a good idea to have separate hearings. Otherwise, we'll be caught in the who's at fault game, which is, I'm sure, was part of your discussions earlier. So, what's the formal process for having a show cause hearing?
Do we have a differentiation between the 2 parties that are dog owners as to the level of noise coming from which one?
It's not clear to me that it can be determined if the noise is coming greater from one particular home or the other. Northridge residents are convinced it's coming from certainly these 2 particular homes that have
But those
similar
are the 2
breeds
being
of dog.
identified. No, I understand that, but I
Right.
mean, so I guess I'm trying to understand why there would be, if we can't differentiate between the households, which happen to be next door to each other, why would we have 2 separate show cause
Well-
hearings rather than, my guess is that any corrective action we would be looking or seeking would be similar in nature.
I believe by having 2 separate hearings, we may have a better decorum in the conduct of the hearings. And at least we can address one particular dog owner at a time, so there is no finger pointing, and we're dealing with the issues related to that particular dog owner.
Are you suggesting we do them on separate evenings or back to back?
Separate evenings.